If you're a fan of this channel, you've probably watched the Crunch Odyssey before. But some of you may not know that Episode 1, An Adventure is Born, wasn't the original Episode 1. There existed an episode before that, and from the title and the fact that I remade it, you already know how I feel about it. So, you might be asking, what is the purpose of this video? Why would I put effort into tearing apart a video that isn't even up? Well, I'm doing this because I want you to learn from my mistakes. I want you to understand what not to do. Now, let's deeply analyze the original episode and see why it was so bad. Okay, so that was sort of a lie. We're actually going to start with episode 0. So yeah, during the process of making the original episode 1, they were both supposed to be one episode, but for some dumb reason, I split them up into 2. So, this episode starts with the sound of an alarm going off. I'll give this part some credit. It was actually decent. You could already feel the sense of danger before the video really started. But then once the video actually starts, there's already so many problems. The first problem is the green screening. You can see parts of the green screen in the video, and it's really distracting. Even if that part was cut out perfectly, it would still look bad, because the lighting on Papyrus makes him look out of place. So, after that, the pilot explains that the alien weapons are too powerful, despite never even showing that there are any weapons. God, I was such a dumbass. Then Papyrus decides to shoot right at the alien planet. What does this weapon even do? I don't know, I guess it just disappeared. So in the next scene, the main villain, Lord Navoo, is introduced, and he has one of the cringiest voices in this episode.
Those Earthlings are trying to attack us.
In this scene, the aliens try to retaliate by firing a laser back at Earth. Then, Papyrus somehow communicates with Navoo and threatens to fire weapons of their own if they don't deactivate the laser. How Papyrus knows that they're planning on firing a laser at their planet? Nobody knows. Then, Papyrus, after like a few seconds, sends a huge barrage of missiles right at Navoo's planet. Then Navoo fires the frickin' laser at Earth after that glorified fireworks show. And yeah, that's the end of episode 0. Trust me, it only gets worse from here. So, this video starts with a shot panning down to Crunch. And then we already run into another problem with this entire video!
So Sal, if you put popcorn in the freezer, would it unpop?
So, the main problem with the jokes isn't that they suck. I mean, they do. But it's that they fundamentally ruin the series. It doesn't know what it wants to be. At one point, it'll be serious, but at another point, it'll be cracking jokes non-stop. Thankfully, this problem was exclusive to the original episode 1. As the scene goes on, another problem appears. The shots have no variety. It usually just switches from one character talking to another with the same angles. So then, Crunch and Sal turn on the news, and then there's breaking news telling them that Papyrus is dead. This is the dumbest plush video cliche ever, and I don't know why I used it. Then, there's a knock on the door, which is Sal's cue to leave. Who's at the door? Why did Sal have to go? More questions that I was too incompetent to consider. Keep Sal's absence in mind though, it'll be important later. Then there's a bit of filler and Crunch is sitting on the couch. He sneezes and a mysterious person says bless you. Why would someone who is trying to be stealthy yell bless you when someone sneezes? Another question I didn't ask myself because I had no idea what I was doing when I made this. Then, paranoid, Crunch looks around to find this guy. Eventually, he makes his way up to his room and finds Nio under his bed. Then, Crunch interrogates the guy. Out of nowhere, he decides to help Nio look for his friend because, I guess, life's boring? Nio and Crunch decide to relax before Crunch gets trained. After more filler and bad jokes, the training session begins, and this is one of the lowest points in the video. So, what does Crunch train in? The ways of the warrior? Perhaps magic spells? Or maybe some intense strength training? It's actually none of these. Nio trains Crunch in Simon Says. Holy shit, I wish I was kidding. Apparently this is to test obedience, because obedience is the most important skill in a fight, not strategy or strength or any of that crap. So, this Simon Says segment goes on for what feels like an eternity. Then, they go over to the kitchen table and Nio finally explains why he came. Crunch then learns that Papyrus is still alive, so Crunch comes up with a genius idea to launch fireworks to lure Papyrus to his house. Why would Papyrus choose to go after some random fireworks? And how do they know that Papyrus is close enough to see them? But conveniently, Papyrus just suddenly arrives at their house. Then, there's an interaction between the three of them. Papyrus tells him why he's hiding and all that crap, but then, out of the blue, Lord Navoo appears. Crunch, being the complete idiot he is, confronts Lord Navoo, and then there's a fight scene, if you could even call it that. Crunch and Navoo go at each other with insults, and Navoo punches Crunch. Then Crunch gets up and says something about beating him again. This creates another problem because it requires the viewer to know about the events of Alien Attack, which is bad when the first episode of the series is supposed to be an entry point to the channel. It also makes Navoo a weak villain because it establishes that our protagonist has defeated him in the past. After that, Navoo knocks him out. What an action-packed fight scene that was. So once that scene is done, Crunch wakes up with Sal in front of him. So I have one big question. Why is Sal there? Sal probably wouldn't even know about Crunch getting knocked out. Wait, why am I asking these questions? This is a plush video. Most plush videos become stupid when you actually think about them. Crunch then explains to Sal everything that happened. This scene is so dumb because the audience already knows what happened, so it serves no purpose at all. Crunch then tells Sal that he's never going to return, and then Sal says that he's coming with Crunch. And then Mugman and Cuphead appear and explain the events of Unleashed. This time it actually kind of makes sense that Cuphead and Mugman would appear because it's been established in previous episodes that they've been freeloading off of Crunch by staying at his house. But again, that requires the context from previous episodes. And then, Crunch explains the events that happened in the episode again because the audience totally needs another recap of what happened. And then they do this let's save the world stuff, and the video ends. Honestly, that was really bad. There were plot holes galore, filler, and atrocious voice acting. Another flaw in the episode is that none of the characters had distinct personalities. With Crunch, he's a naive kid and Sal's a supportive friend, but that's as deep as it gets. Crunch is also a bad protagonist in this episode. Crunch is more of an observer than a participant in the story. But this isn't the episode 1 that's public on my channel. After making episode 2, I looked back at episode 1 and was not satisfied. Rightfully so. I wanted episode 1 to be on par with episode 2, so I decided to remake it. So how is it compared to the original? So this video starts with the same opening sequence in space, but you can already see the differences within the first few seconds. The green screening quality is miles better and the scene looks a lot more believable and the voice acting has improved.
What the hell? Someone's firing at me. Maneuver past the lasers and move towards the planet.
Another thing you'll notice is the shift in style. There are two major changes. First off is the new aspect ratio. I find that it makes the video look more appealing, especially on phones, which is where most people watch YouTube. The second change, and the most important one, is color. I like to change up the colors for some visual flair during certain scenes. This scene is much better than the original because it shows more than it tells. Instead of telling the audience that there's a threat, it shows the ship flying towards Venus and getting shot at. Then, there's Navoo's side. If there's any voice that improved the most, it would be Lord Navoo's. His voice went from one of the cringiest to listen to one of my favorites from the series.
Oh, Papyrus. Sending a ship towards our planet. Pathetic.
After Navoo's introduced, he does some bad guy stuff like blowing up their ship. Unlike episode 0, Navoo's actually a threat in this. After blowing up the ship, he hacks into Papyrus' screen, and that makes more sense because alien technology. The exchange between Navoo and Papyrus is more meaningful this time around because it establishes who both of these characters are. Papyrus is a greedy businessman, and Navoo is a crazy man who will kill anyone in his path. Then, the scene ends just like the original. Overall, this segment is executed so much better than the original episode 0. Even if the voice acting and visuals were good in that one, it'd still be missing the storytelling and the deeper characters of the remake. Now we get to the other segment of the remake. Instead of starting with a shot from inside the house, it starts with a shot from outside and pans around the area. It's a minor change, but it helps make the world feel bigger. Then, we finally get the interaction between Crunch and Sal.
Hey Sal, what would you think about having an awesome sleepover?
That sounds like it could be a lot of fun.
Think about it. We'll watch movies, we'll eat junk food, and we'll play video games.
Okay, that sounds amazing. I'm in.
Instead of cracking dumb jokes like the original, Crunch and Sal are planning a sleepover. The scene already establishes these characters. Crunch is an enthusiastic and upbeat character, while Sal is more laid back and chill. The improved voice acting really helps communicate these personalities better, too. This is what exposition should do. It should establish characters and setting. You can also see that this video looks more visually appealing. You may think that I got a new camera, but that's not the case. The original episode and the remake were filmed with the same camera. What's changed are the camera angles and composition. After this interaction comes the news segment. This time, it's delivered through a phone notification instead of them turning on the TV and conveniently seeing it. This scene plays out similarly to the original, but with one key difference. Sal leaves to buy snacks for the sleepover, which fixes two problems. The first one being a reason for Sal to leave, and the second one being one that appears later in the video. After this scene is the encounter with Nio. Unlike the original scene, there's build up to his appearance. First, he follows Crunch up the stairs. Then, there's a shot of him approaching Crunch's room. Instead of Crunch finding Nio, Nio sneaks up and knocks him out. The interrogation scene is done a lot differently in the remake. In this one, the roles are reversed. Nio's the one asking Crunch the questions. This interaction establishes the fact that Papyrus is alive early on into the video instead of halfway in. Crunch then decides to help Nio look for Papyrus. After that scene, Crunch and Nio meet up again. Nio then explains one of the main concepts of the Crunch Odyssey, which are elementals. After that, Nio tells Crunch about his adventures. This sparks inspiration in Crunch, and it motivates him to become an adventurer. In the remake, Crunch has an intrinsic motivation, while in the original, Crunch had an extrinsic motivation. This deepens Crunch's character and gives him a goal to strive towards. Then, one of the highest points of the video comes, the training session. Instead of being a game of Simon Says to test Crunch's obedience, it's a test to see how well Crunch can fight, which makes a lot more sense since the series revolves around fights. This test also shows how weak Crunch really is, and how he makes up for it with his strategic thinking. After that fight, there's more exposition, but this time it's about a different concept, magic, which is something else that gets utilized later in the series. Then, someone walks into the house. Crunch assumes that this guy is Sal, so he goes over to see him. Instead of Sal, it's Papyrus, however. This scene plays out similar to how it did in the original, but with some slight differences. Instead of Papyrus being lured to the house, he followed Nio, so that plot hole is gone. Another thing that the remake does is further develop Papyrus' personality. In this scene, Crunch explains his motivations to Papyrus, and he straight up shoots him down and puts Crunch in his place. The next scene plays out just like the original. Navoo appears and Crunch gets overconfident and tries to fight him. If there was a scene that benefited from the improved composition the most, it would be this scene. The many different camera angles make this fight so much better to look at than the original. So after Crunch gets his ass handed to him by Navoo, he tells Crunch to just give up. This gives Crunch the motivation to not only be an adventurer for his own sake, but to also do it to spite everyone who says he can't. The scene then plays out like it did in the original, but overall just better. The scene after that is basically the same one from the original, but Sal actually has a reason to be there. Instead of just showing up for no reason, he comes back with snacks for the sleepover, like he said he would at the beginning of the video. Crunch then explains to Sal what happened, except in the remake, it's skipped over, which means that the video doesn't have to explain information to the audience that they already know. Crunch explains his motive to Sal, and how he will venture out on his own. Sal decides to join Crunch on his journey, and if I'm gonna be honest, that scene in the remake is so much more powerful than the original scene.
That's the thing. I wanted to say goodbye to you because I'm probably never gonna return here.
Crunch, you're not saying goodbye to me, because I'm coming with you.
This is why I plan to go out and set off my grand journey to beat that alien and save the world.
Your grand journey?
Yeah?
You mean our grand journey?
After that happens, Mugman and Cuphead show up. It's implied that they heard their conversation, so that gives the video another reason not to explain stuff that the audience knows. Unlike the original, Mugman actually goes in depth about the lore, and he actually goes over the major events of Unleashed, which, now that I think about it, is a video that also deserves a remake. After that part, the video plays out exactly like it did in the original. Overall, this remake is far superior to the original, and it makes the original episode unwatchable compared to it. The remake dove deeper into its characters and established them better, set up concepts that'll be utilized later in the series, got rid of plot holes in the original, and it had a distinct style. The remake isn't a flawless video, however. It spends a lot of time explaining its concepts, and while the voice acting is really improved, it could still be better. But I think that this video is truly an entry point to this series, and it redeemed an episode that would have turned potential fans away from it. If there's anything that you take away from this video, It said it's important to look at your own work with a critical eye. You won't truly improve unless you look inward and acknowledge your mistakes. Your past mistakes are your most valuable teachers.